Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. And so much of my show in the last 5 years or so has become about rhythm. It's a nonverbal way of healing, especially in the right setting when you are able to experience that vibration with cats who are willing to go and play beyond what they know and take chances and maybe fall on their face, but get back up and keep on swinging away. And ultimately, my elders were people that came up on the bandstand learning from the original masters of music, and they really knew where they stood. Vocabulary in music was not being made within the academy, but rather on the bandstand. And my guest today comes from an incredible lineage, family lineage of music. His father was a jazz trumpet player. His uncle was the legendary Fischer. He went off to Chicago and just started to kick around and burn all the gigs in Chicago, all the different places to play, so many different cats coming in, just a total melting pot of music, ultimately connecting with the American breed that did turn into Shaka Khan and Stevie Wonder. So many amazing hits, all through rhythm, all through love. Andre Fischer, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake. It's great to be here.
My man, I just wanted you to talk about how much you were aware when you were listening to older records, whatever the genre of music was, how prevalent it was that the drummer kept time on the top of the kit and used the bass drum more for accents and rebound.
Uh, First of all, that's not the way I learned. I am originally a trombone player. My emphasis wasn't on drums until later. The way I was taught time by my father, basically, was given hand drums, congas, bongos, different pieces of percussion. So before I played anything, we went through rhythm training, and also he said he found out where my body groove was. That meant certain tempos he knew I was comfortable with, certain rhythms he saw my facial or my physical reaction to them. So he'd start with those as far as teaching them. I played trumpet first, then I went to trombone because the mouthpiece used to hurt my mouth, I remember. But
I
I got into the drums later, and basically because I wasn't going to take a brand new trombone and swivel it and dance on stage with it. So you weren't going to catch me messing up my horn. But I got into drums through Al Barty, who was the drummer with Lionel Hampton,
Sure.
friend of my dad's. Then I got into it more with Frank Butler, who's on the Kulise Mama album with John Coltrane.
I mean, Miles's favorite drummer was Frank Butler, but Frank was all junked out all the time, you know?
That's why my mother had to be there when the lessons came, and I could never loan him any of my drum parts.
I cannot believe that you took lessons from Frank Butler. That is the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yep, when I lived on Pico and Arlington in Los Angeles, around the corner from Fillmore Jr. and Fillmore Sr., the vocal coach.
I was referring more to just listening to records, whether or not, regardless of how you started with the hand drums and those patterns and the body groove. It's just when I talk to cats like George Porter, other cats too, the bottom of the kit was really not that prevalent in so many of the great R&B, blues, and rock jazz records. Those cats, all the cats were dancing on the top of the kit. And I guess maybe more to the point, regardless of when you started playing drums, how did you learn to let your dance in your own body? I think that I remember talking to Julian Priester and in Chicago when Sun Ra was doing sorority and fraternity gigs, he would just point to a soloist and they were expected to have their own internal time feel, and that allowed the rhythm section to open up melodically. and they wouldn't have to rely so much on the rhythm section. And that just came from all inner time feel. And I was just hoping you could talk a little bit more about that body groove and
Yeah,
how
well,
you.
that's to me. I was raised with my father as a manager and always conducting a big band. Okay, that's exactly how each of those members function. Okay, if Count Basie had a weak drummer, it wouldn't stop the horn section from hitting where Count wanted him to.
Right.
Okay, each of those people were expected to have their own clocks on them. Okay, so that's how I was raised, on a chair beside a bandstand, watching my father stand up in a white tux playing Cherry Pink on Apple Blossom,
Ah, I love it. God, this is great.
and then watching Claire up at the Matador in San Francisco with Cal Jader, and watching Armando Praza and the musicians that he had with him playing, you know, or George Shearing, or any of the people I was exposed to by my parents. All the people my parents exposed me to were older. So I always had peer problems because no one knew who I was talking about.
Oh man, wait, hold on for a second. Um, your dad. What's your dad's name, by the way?
Stuart Fischer. The first band Claire was in my dad's band. Stuart he played with Woody Herman. He played with Stan Kenton. He played with Little John Beecher. He played with the Lee Williams Orchestra that was booked out of National Orchestra Service out of Omaha, Nebraska, from the late 40s through the early 60s.
He
And
was. Can you just talk a little bit about? So he was a big band. He was in big bands, but the first small or one of the first smaller ensembles was with your dad and Claire.
Claire was my dad's pianist. Claire's younger than my dad.
Right. So can you talk about that first ensemble? Only because I mean the Claire Fisher. I mean I mean I'm so impressed by your family lineage, but I mean I have records of him with trio records with Gary Peacock and Gene Stone, and it they hold up as well as the Bill Evans stuff that was going on the East Coast with Scotty LaFaro and Paul Motian. And I just wanted to know what kind of was it birth of the cool music that they were playing in that small ensemble? Can you paint the picture of the kind of music that those cats were grooving on?
Well, first of all, um, you got to figure some years back when my dad passed, he was 89. So they were born in the middle 20s or early 1920s. So they came up playing everything. There are conversations about Fats Waller. There are conversations about ragtime and boogie woogie, and then into Duke Ellington. So it spanned a lot. It spanned from that all the way up through Birth of the Cool and beyond. So the same thing happened to them. My grandfather was president of barbershop quartets of Greater Michigan. My
Hmm.
grandmother was a choral director for 4 churches. My aunt Suzanne was a piano teacher and vocal teacher. My uncle Dean was a bass player. So they had music in that house forever. And my uncle Louis made violins. Etienne and Francois made violas. The other made cello. I mean, music was just, that was the deal.
Absolutely.
You
I mean,
know.
just yeah. No, I
And
mean,
between that and
go ahead.
between that, my I think my grandpa owned a uniform factory. They made uniforms, some shit. I don't remember, but there was always, even as a kid growing up in Omaha or in Minneapolis, the different places I lived, you know, all the kids in the neighborhood, the parents had them taking tap lessons. Somebody was taking a lesson for something, you know.
Totally. That's so. I just want to be clear. Um, what years were you in Indianapolis?
Minneapolis.
Minneapolis. What years were you in Minneapolis?
Yeah, Minneapolis. I was born here. My mom was singing at a club called the Lakeview Club out near Lake Minnetonka, and her water broke. And I was born the next day. That's how I was born in Minneapolis. She was gigging on stage, and while my dad was here dealing with the professor from the University of Minnesota for his composition, he was going to take some classes from him to get his final credits for graduating from college. And this is after he came back from the war and from World War II, where when my dad was drafted, he was in Gil Evans' big band in the Army.
Oh my gosh.
And then on the same base, they had one of the better black bands since they were separated. And my favorite picture, which I'll send you, I'll send it to you, is a large black band from the same military base. And if you look closely, there's one white guy in the trumpet section. That was my father. And I said,
that is so cool.
That was his favorite picture. I said, Dad, how did you get in that band? Because, you know, they were segregated. He said, I got special permission from the base commander because that was his favorite band. He said, also, the way I got in the band is I had to play my ass off.
Absolutely, man. He had to play. You would not be allowed. Yeah.
So that, and then he told me all of the conversations with Gil, and then I met Gil as a child, and I met his wife, and I met Gil, and I had conversations with him. My dad took me to meet a lot of people. I met Duke Ellington. I met Louis Armstrong. I met Pharoah Sanders. I met Lenny Tristiano. I met Bill Evans. I met all these people. Billy Strayhorn, who at the time I didn't know what gay was, so he talked funny. So I asked my father if he was from England, and my father said he's from another country, but he's not from here. So that was his way of saying he's gay, and I ain't got no comments about it. So anyway,
no, I want you to just talk about Louis, Duke, Lionel Hampton. I mean, these guys. I mean, I'm 44, and you know, like I said in my intro, that word jazz, which me and you could walk down the block and ask 20 people what that word means, we get 20 different answers. But the reality is that the music and the vocabulary and the extensions of that music are now, if they're being created at all, are being done in the academy just because there aren't places to play. And that music, melodic improvisation, is no longer a popular music the way it was when you were born in the 50s. And I just wonder about the gracefulness. I mean, Neil Cassidy, the legendary line, grace beats karma. And those cats were the most graceful people, because I've interviewed Bill Cosby before the world caved in on him. And how all those cats had to go to the Howard Theater and put makeup on in the alleyways, 5 shows a day. Yusef Lateef getting run out of Colorado so hard.
Yeah.
And yet those cats, the ones that you mentioned, you know, specifically the ones of color, can you just talk about their grace? I'm not even sure if that's the right word. I mean, Lionel, just talk about those cats and what was so just sort of intoxicating about them, not just as players, but as people.
You assumed it was intoxicating.
Well, most of the cats I've talked to, you know, Louis was just I've never heard a negative story per se, but hey, the floor is yours.
Well, one relationship is when you're a youngster and they could tell you're serious about the craft that they're already proficient at. The way they treat you and what they expose to you is one thing. If you're a fan, it's another. If you're a critic, but yet you don't play, there's another. So there's a lot of different scenarios as far as that's concerned. But a lot of it a lot of it isn't romantic. A lot of it was necessary. And as you spoke at the beginning when you came in talking about therapy, music is therapy, people of color have used that when because of their own mores not being able to go to a psychiatrist or admit the fact that they're schizophrenic, like when Donny Hathaway walked out a window. You know, when people saw the signs of it, but yet that wasn't manly to be able to refer him. Okay, so for people of color who also, when women go into the hospital, they don't even get the same amount of painkillers because for some reason there's an assumption that a black woman has a higher pain tolerance. It's bullshit. The bottom line is my mother used to say Jackie Onassis has boogers. Everybody shit, showers, and shaves. Okay, so all of these differences are put there for the difference for its unbalancing effect. Where the United Nations didn't start in New York or the Versailles. New York started the United Nations started on a bandstand. When Benny Goodman went down south and said, if you won't let Lionel Hampton or Louis Armstrong stay in the hotel with us, we're not going to perform. Okay, and it's not because he was necessarily for rights of others. He just knew what he needed and what he wanted, and he wasn't going to have it any other way.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of ways people survive, and the culture. In other words, how long can you pimp your sister before you have to call her a hoe? Okay, so in other words, when you're selling your culture, but yet sometimes to rationalize it, you call it your craft. It's still about a tag on it or the politics that's played, because I've had to play many politics. The politics of a record company make those by state government look very simple by comparison. As a matter of fact, the politics of a record company, I'm quite sure George Patton or Rommel would appreciate it.
Absolutely, totally.
But the deal is when you're talking about humankind, we're the only fools who piss in the water. Okay, so in other words, if you can't sustain that which keeps you alive, you are an idiot. Okay, so when I was breaking into manhood through musicianship and through to make mustard was harder in my own home than it was by other musicians or any school or teacher I ever went before. Okay, so in other words, when people were telling me about, aren't you worried about this guy plays better than you? I said, no, I just need my dad to say, this song I showed him I wrote yesterday is okay. Because he would usually say, well, the difficulty factor is kind of low, son. I said, Dad, it's a lullaby. So anyway, so I had a different set of standards to go through. And I've been taught, and my parents showed me that no institution was ever held responsible for the teaching of their children or complaining about a teacher or a school system. They said, that's our job. He said, school's nothing but a hip daycare center. Okay, so I've come up a different way. So my view doesn't fit. It works because I'm still alive. Okay, but as far as musicians were concerned, what got me about a lot of them, it's content. It's good content. Les McCann, or I remember Paul Humphreys, a lot of folks telling me a long time ago, they said all the young people that talk to us, if we've been successful, they want to know the system with which we work within. In other words, what's the game? Okay, they're not asking me about content. They're asking me about game. And all the people that came to me for music business classes at the college I was the dean at, and some of the other places where I've taught and lectured, everyone's so worried about the game, but yet they will go attempt to play the game with no fucking content, with bullshit.
Damn.
Okay. And the only thing that kept me, my friends like Stevie Wonder or Ray Parker or all the folks that I came up with in Lionel Richie, all those folks, was content. In other words, that you're communicating something that other people understand. In other words, you don't pay money to go see a band you don't get. You don't pay money $100 to go see a concert and you don't know what the fuck they're doing on stage. No, there's a thread that connects us. Okay. And so what I see a lot of people doing is just coveting the thread, and that's communicating. And that's what a lot of it is. Same with vocalists. I've only worked with vocalists, most of the records I've produced, that I've been successful with. And that's because they're storytellers. And my mom was a singer and a storyteller. So in other words, my first point of reference to music was this father who arranged and played with big bands, and an uncle whose composition skills, even when he was humming, were fantastic. And a mother who sang, was a mother, was maternal, and could riff her ass off and would make me play brushes on a magazine while she did the dishes and sang. Okay, so those experiences, those aren't ones you find in school, and those aren't ones everyone you interview is going to say that happened. They'll say something else happened. So all of those put together, and the fact that you realize that man is an idiot at times, sometimes music saves your life, because what it takes is it takes 100% of you. But when you're good to it, it takes care of you. I don't mean financially, but sometimes emotionally or spiritually.
Absolutely.
And also to do good music that makes you feel good. Don't let me get into the science of vibrations, and
Dude, you can go there, baby, because it's been healing me, man, like no other.
well, it definitely. That's why I could tell from which Frank Zappa mixes were mixed on cocaine. Okay, because
Yeah.
it's all high end shit. Okay, and where low end stuff affects the body, and
Yeah. Oh my
people
God.
people of color tend to listen to things that are a little bit more earthbound on the one. But there's always exceptions to that. After traveling, to all parts of South America and Asia and just all over the place, or watching some East Indian or some musicians from Pakistan kick ass. Okay, so like I was saying before, the United Nations started on a bandstand. So that became like a place to dwell, a place to covet. And not only that, but when you traveled, being a road dog, you had other brethren out there who understood what you were going through, and you compared notes, and the performances weren't like a competition. It only became competition when people were judging you, and part of the judgment decided whether you could make a dollar off of it or not. When something becomes your subsistence, that's how you survive. Your view of it is different than that of just you're going to do it anyway. So the people I tend to hang around and that I gravitated towards, it's just like Stevie. It doesn't matter if Stevie had ever been paid. Stevie will play because that's part of his existence. For me, music is part of my existence, and it's helped save my life. It's also put kids through college, and bought a couple of nice rugs and some amois. Okay, but
Well, let me ask you. I want to go about. I just want to talk to you about this, and get your reaction to it. Just
go
because
ahead.
going back to this idea of, because I think it's an incredibly salient point about Paul Humphreys, like arguably like one of my favorite drummers of all time. Frank Butler, again, say what you will, the guy was just playing his ass off. But you talk about this knowing the system versus content, and Mingus called his music Mingus music, and Max Roach would go to blows if you called his music jazz. And to me, like that word, Big Black. I don't know if you ever crossed paths with him, the
I
great
was in
poet.
the play Big Time Buck White for
Oh
Oscar
my! No,
Brown.
you were not, dude. Was
I
Merle?
was the drummer in the pit band with Fillmore Jr. And then after Phil, it was Merle Saunders.
Dude, you're making my day, dude. Wait, was that it? Was Chuck Rainey in that, or was that on the East Coast or the West Coast? I'm trying to figure that.
That was East Coast. West Coast was the New Committee Theater, on Pacific in San
Oh
Francisco,
my, dude, this is unbelievable.
down the block from Basin Street West.
So Black told me, basic. So was Black in that band, by the way? Was he in the pit band?
Black was not in the band. He was big time Buck White.
Oh my, dude, Andre Fischer going to Never Ever Land on me right now. Yeah,
And
so
also, and that same play was Ted Ross, who played the Lion and the Wiz.
totally, totally, dude. No, because
Was
I interviewed Merle's his son, and he broke that down, and Chuck, and so this was Fillmore Jr. But the point is that Black told me that it was the word was jazz, JASS. You'd go to the brothel, somebody was playing boogie woogie, and there was this house of ill repute, and then all of a sudden, white journalists like myself came along and was like, "Wow, these are geniuses, and this stuff can be commodified. Let's drop the S's and put some Z's on it." I just wonder about your dad and Claire. I know they were in it, but did they come from the Duke Ellington school that's all music? And were labels even anywhere? Like, how did you refer to music? Because now there's so much branding, there's so much, you have to fit into some kind of box. And before, it was so beautiful because someone like Paul Humphreys, he'd be swinging with Lawrence Welk, and then Maxine Weldon, and then Charles Kennard. So just where did your dad and Claire and your family come down on labeling the music?
They didn't. It was because they create music.
Right.
The labeling of music is not usually always done by the creator.
Hmm.
Okay? Ask Stevie what he calls his music. Okay? He'll look at you funny and you'll think he can see.
Right. I dig.
Okay?
Yeah.
It was based upon that motherfucker doesn't know how to play, or gosh, that was great. Or she's flat. Because I remember getting ready to go produce Tony Bennett, and my father said, "I know you like Tony, but he said that's from a memory from high school about Left My Heart in San Francisco." He said, your job is to tell him when he sings flat, so stop being so fucking enamored.
Wow.
He said, your job is to put shit right. He said, so go do your job. And that's
Dude,
what
your dad was a badass, man. I mean, that dude, the bar was so high.
Well,
But
he wound up making the music department at a place called College of the Canyons in Valencia, California. And he had the big band program there for over 25, 26 years. After being on the road from late 40s all the way up through, let's say, early 60s.
Do you remember, like, can you just talk a little bit about, like, the first, I guess the first kind of drum kit you had? I mean, was it during the Frank Butler years? When did you actually get, and was it a modified kit or was it a full kit?
The first kit was from a pawn shop. It was a marching size bass drum that I drill holes and put spurs in. The bass drum pedal was a ghost pedal, also bought from a pawn shop. And then I had to find someone who knew what those were to help me adjust it and fix it. I got some old beat up cymbal stands. I got a Slingerland snare, actually an old WFL snare too. A really rickety hi-hat and some used Zildjian cymbals. I got a couple cymbals from Verna Barlow. Was a drummer, and I got one cymbal from Clarence Johnston.
Yes.
And I got one from Clarence Johnson taught Raymond Pounds, the drummer, how to.
Raymond, my dear friend, man, dude, dude, Clarence Johnston, man, that dude was, wow, unbelievable. So it was it was sort of you put it all together, but there it was, Andre Fischer's first kit. There it was. What year was that?
Let's see. 8th, 9th. Into the eighth grade, ninth grade.
And you were still in Minnesota at that point, or where were you at?
No, I went to John Burroughs Junior High and graduated from LA High.
So talk a
We
little, yeah, no, this is important. Like once you, before Chicago, can you talk about, uh,
left
did you,
left Minnesota at the end of the fourth grade. Went to California because Claire moved there, and he had my brother come live with him there, and they sent for us.
were you able to play, or go down to memory lane or the It Club? I'm just curious about some of the earliest gig.
My mother sang at the It Club. I
Wow.
remember seeing Dinah Washington there, and the Black Orchid, and the Rubaiyat, quite a few places. In Memory Lane, before Marla Gibbs bought it. I remember seeing Wes Montgomery at Memory Lane, and they locked the doors because they stayed open after hours. And Wes Montgomery had just played the Shrine Auditorium. And after the Shrine, he went and did a set at Memory Lane. The people loved him so much, they just locked the doors, and he played till around 4 in the
Oh,
morning.
I love this so much, dude.
And people didn't even sit in the chairs. They all sat on the floor. They sat at his feet. And Monk was on piano, his brother. He had, I forget the rest of the band, but it was his whoever toured with him. And I remember that's also at the same time my dad was introducing me to Don Sebesky. I remember I met going to Claire sessions at the old NBC studios, which used to be right there on the corner across from Wallach's Music City, where Home Savings wound up there in Los Angeles. There was a big recording studio there, and TT&G and Gold Star, and all these different places I got drugged to by my uncle and by my dad. Matter of fact, when my uncle got drafted into the military, they drafted him to West Point as assistant choral director. And after he got out of West Point, when he got out, that's when he went with the Hi-Los and started arranging, being their band director and the music director, and then producing records on them. So it's like all those situations my people took me to. You know, I went to recording studios. It's like, you know, I did homework in the studio.
Absolutely. No, because I
Or
mean,
at,
it wasn't unheard of for cats. I mean, Ahmad Jamal joined the Union at 10 years old. Did you join the Union when you were still in Los Angeles?
I was uh, I was in the sixth grade when I joined the Musicians Union.
That is unreal. And so,
I,
can you just,
I was going to 37th Street School.
I mean, like, can you talk about, I mean, mid 60s, um, you had all these great live clubs. Do you remember some of the early sessions? Were you doing suds and duds? Were you just doing demos? I just am curious about, um,
You
you know,
you don't do specifics. You do anything you can. You don't say, well, I'm just going to do that today. You know, when you're young, you want to do everything. And
can you, can you
there was
talk
a
about, yeah, I would love you to talk about some of those, like, I mean,
there was a theater on Adams and Crenshaw. It was called the Kabuki Theater.
oh boy.
It was the Japanese movies, but after hours, it was called the Adams West Theater. And after hours on the weekend, that's where I saw Miles Davis and Yusef Lateef and all of these other artists. And matter of fact, at the time, my mother on occasion would sing in Les McCann's choral choir, and that's also when Les was playing with Lou Rawls, and Lou Rawls was being featured with Les McCann. And that during those periods of time, that's when I was hanging out with Paul Humphrey. But
You're touching my heart, man, because I know we're just getting connected, but I want to read this story to you. It was from
was,
this is from my interview with Steve Kahn, and But he's talking about my dear brother and uncle, rest in peace, Clarence McDonald. I just want to read this to you, and then you can riff on
Oh
it.
Jesus, Clarence. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
still not. I'm still not over that yet.
The man, I was, he just, I don't even have words for it. But let me read this to you, and then you can riff on it. He said,
Please, please.
yeah, he said, Clarence, he was, Steve Kahn saying, I was just a happy kid from California. I didn't know anything. Clarence at the time had been working with the Friends of Distinction. Somehow I ended up getting the gig with that band. One day we're rehearsing for something, and a keyboard player, Phil Moore Jr., called Clarence about a recording that was coming up. I was noodling in the background, and Phil said, well, who's that? Clarence said, it's this kid, Steve Kahn. He said, tell that kid I wanted to play on my record next week. Of course, Clarence tells me, and I say, you're joking, right? Next thing I know, I'm going to a rehearsal with Phil Moore and Clarence, Styx Hooper playing drums, and Wilton Felders playing Fender bass. I was in shock the whole time because I idolized the Jazz Crusaders. To be sitting in the same room as Wilton and Styx was insane. On the album Right On, Phil Moore album, Andre Fischer played drums on some tracks. Can you talk about, right? I mean, first of all, there's just so much there, but was that maybe the first record you were on?
No,
Okay.
I played on a bunch of records and demos. There was a couple. Ted Brunson. There was a couple people who had little demo studios, and also certain rhythm sections. There's a group called the Young Hearts, which was an R&B group, kind of
Tony
like the
Tony Dumas, man. Yeah.
Young Hearts were kind of like the Whispers, and that kind of group, R&B group. So the recording was actually more R&B and not that much jazz. Actually, the jazz was more live situations. Or I remember who's the guy who made "God Didn't Make Little Green Apples." It don't rain in Oklahoma in the summertime. Oh,
Oh, let me look it up.
O.C. Smith.
Oh my, his church, man. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I used to play behind O.C. Smith with Jack Wilson when Verna Barlow, the drummer, would call Fillmore Jr. because he got I think arrested for a DUI, and he called from jail to Phil's house, and Phil was my neighbor from around the corner on Pico and Arlington near the miniature golf course. And I would come over to Phil's house. He built a studio in his garage, and that's when I met his father, Fillmore Sr. And then all these musicians would come through, and plus some I already knew because of my parents. But then Phil introduced me to a ton of other people. That's also why, after touring for a while, when I came back in town, Phil was looking for me, and that's when he took me to San Francisco with him to meet with Oscar Brown and start with Big Time Buck White. But anyway, let
I
me
do.
back
This
up.
is you are blowing. Wait, this is un. So what you're talking to me? Um.
Phil was my neighbor,
Yeah. Right.
and I would schlep for him, and also when he had an idea and needed someone to play the drums, he'd grab me, and I'd keep a beat or do whatever I had to do so he could get his idea. That's when I did that nappy head with him, and that's when um, there was Neswe Erdogan came out, and that's when I met Neswe. And I remember also by the time I got to the 11th grade, I also did a little interning one summer for Jerry Wexler in New York and going by the Atlantic offices.
Wow.
And man, I'm 74. So in other words, there's a lot of shit I forgot more than people know.
Well, no, but I want to be very clear. Part of my show, I mean, after 1,800 interviews, it's important to because I have this ability to sort of dig deep into this bag of your career and pull stuff out. And to be honest with you, I mean, to know that you were, I mean, the All Music Guide, which is hardly the Holy Grail, um, it doesn't really say that you started your recording career until you got to Chicago with Eddie Harris. And
Wrong.
right,
Yeah.
so I'm talking like this is very important to go back and I'm just curious, like, was like Leroy Vinegar coming to Phil's house? Was Lawrence Marable? I mean, who were some of the cats that you got hip to when you started to hang with Phil?
Well, you got to remember, my mother was a singer too.
Mm-hmm.
Buster Williams used to play with her.
Because he was with the Jazz Crusaders for a while. That's unbelievable.
Buster Williams was with the Crusaders.
If you listen to those Lighthouse albums from 67, 68, he's on those albums, and Wilton's playing tenor. Anyway, that's on. I cannot believe Buster was playing bass with your mom. That's
Yeah, because
unbelievable.
I used to do jingles with Joe Sample and Wilton at
Oh
the
my
at the
God.
Jackson's Fives house on Havenhurst out in the valley for the Charles Stern ad agency, and Fillmore Jr. was on piano. He'd
I
be
mean,
piano, and Joe would play organ, or one would play acoustic, one would play Rose, and Wilton would play bass. He didn't play sax.
well, I luckily interviewed Wilton. Some Jewish bar owner gave him a bass, and within a few months, he was like the first call bass player in Los Angeles. What years did you? So the Jackson Five. What years were those? Like late '60s, you say, or maybe right around the '70?
Mm, no, because '70 I was in Chicago.
Right.
This had to be late. This had to be late '60s.
I'm
It had
just
to be
curious.
late because I graduated high school in '67,
At that point,
and also I
yeah.
went to high school with Jessica Cleaves from Friends of Distinction.
My gosh. Yeah, no, Lamonte Macklemore, a dear, what a beautiful cat that guy is, man. I mean, is it fair to say that um, you had already were you getting calls to I don't remember the Barlow cat. I'm not familiar with him. He'd wind up in jail. You'd get calls for those gigs. By the time you graduated high school,
But
were
those specific gigs were with O.C. Smith, and it was playing at the Pied Piper up on Crenshaw.
oh, I love this, dude. This is so classic.
And
Yeah, because yeah,
the pianist was Jack Wilson.
Jack, dude, I just flashed on him the other day because I've been listening to this Roy Ayers record, and I remember Roy Ayers, one of the first cats he played with as a sideband was Jack Wilson, which is he was such a great player, man. But the
And,
OC,
and then there was Louis Large played bass. Uh, Louis Spears played bass with Phil sometimes. Then there was Buster. There was a bunch of different people.
what did you were you getting calls like uh, at that point to fill in for Paul Humphrey ever? Like at the, I mean, did you ever have a chance to? Who else? Like what? I guess here's the better question. When you graduated in '67, um, you really, you kind of really was. My point is that a lot of cats that I've talked to have had a lot of humbling experiences on the bandstand, getting kicked off the bandstand. I'm talking about Famadou Don Moy from the Arts Ensemble of Chicago or Denny
Well,
Seiler.
because they couldn't keep the tempo up on Giant Steps.
That's right. No, you're darn right. But your dad already set the bar so high. What was like one thing from a musicality point of view that you still needed to shed on once you graduated high school? Or were you already kind of oblivious to the noise and you were just cooking the groove?
You're never oblivious to the noise because it's in close proximity.
Yes.
Okay, so in other words, you learn that when you get older. When you're younger, everything affects you, and until you don't let it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so in other words, the difference between being mad or being emotional. There's a difference between the two. So the deal is by the time I graduated high school, I was already gigging on weekends, going to other places in other states. Okay, I started touring and gigging at 14. In the 11th and 12th grade, I used to sleep on the pillows at Maverick's Flat and be late for school the next day because I'd be practicing with a guy named Hillard Streets. And at Maverick's Flat at the time, Tony Maiden was playing guitar with a group called the Rainbows, which was
Hmm.
these three girls. And those bands and the musicians with Manuel Kellogg on drums too. He wound up playing with the Graham Central Station. We played behind all the acts that came through Mavericks, or we'd be there to witness them, and which was everybody from Billy Preston to Ike and Tina Turner. To a lot of groups came through there, and then the groups that were put together by the Daniels brothers who own Mavericks was Love Machine, and there was another band that they would send out to Europe that would come back. And then at the time that was happening, the Whiskey had a great R&B band with Tank and Preston Love were running this band up at the Whiskey. That's when black people didn't go up on Sunset. Okay, they'd have the Temptations at the Whiskey, and it would be an all-white audience. And matter of fact, that's when Baldwin Hills and Leimert Park, there weren't any black people there then. So this was before White Flight. And then what happens is we'd go to the Whiskey, we'd go to all the different places, any after hours place, any club, any place where there was music, musicians would wind up there. We go to Bonesville, we go to Shelley's Manhole, we go to the Summit, which was up on Stocker off Crenshaw. Up at the top of the hill was a jazz club. The Pied Piper,
Oh my God.
the It Club. I saw everyone. I saw Miles the night that after he played at the Adams West, which I said was the Kabuki Theater down off of Adams.
That's right.
My mother and I are out in the back, and we're talking to people. The gig's over. Miles gets in a fight over a 19-year-old girl and her boyfriend. He gets hit in the lip and cancels his concert for Royce Hall the next day. Okay, this is shit I'm made privy to.
Oh, wait, I want to just get something on the table, Andre. Do you have is your part of your heritage from the motherland of Africa?
What do you mean, my parents?
I'm saying you have lighter skin, but would you say that you are descendants from the motherland?
My mother is African American. My father is white.
Right. So based on the fact that so you often, I mean, Gary Bartz would talk to me about, they'd walk into a department store and they'd hassle his mom more than him because his mom had darker skin than him. But going back to like
I
that,
went through that too.
I mean, that to me is like, because I mean, you're one of the cats, and so
Yeah, but my parents got a hold of that. They told me up front. They said black kids won't relate to you because they'll think you think you're better because you're light skinned, and white kids won't know what to do because you don't play basketball and you don't act like a typical black child. So they
dude,
said,
so how did you deal? I mean, tell me a little bit. So once they gave you that, this is so amazing, because the truth is,
yeah, but that's called parents raise a warrior. That's
I
all.
did. No, I dig, bro. I dig it, man. Go ahead, continue.
In other words, you have to make your child worldly. If you're only neighborhoodly, then the shit in the neighborhood will always fuck with you. Okay, you have to go beyond the scope of that. And that's the only reason I've been able to survive and live in other countries and do other things, because my mind is not in one place musically or physically. It's like you have to astral travel before you know how to fucking do it. Just because the world's fucked up or somebody doesn't like you, what the fuck are you supposed to do? You got to get on with it.
Absolutely.
My father said, I told him one day, I said, the fucking light at the end of the tunnel. He said, don't ever say that shit to me. He said, if you're looking for the light, he said, the light at the end of the tunnel, some other motherfucker's got a torch. He said, you got to bring your own torch.
Oh, I love this, dude. I would love to have hung with your dad, man. What
he said when you show up, when you walk in the door, light comes in. And he said the only reason why you're enamored with everybody is because you haven't been in the room after you've left. Sometimes it gets dark in there.
Mm-hmm.
He said sometimes you're the one bringing the light, and don't forget it. Your job is to bring a torch. I said, yes, sir, and I've been doing it ever since. You know,
Andre, it is so beautiful to hear this. I mean,
it's not confidence. It's the reality of survival. It's the reality.
right,
This
right.
reality, and amongst that survival and all of the other bullshit going on, to have any sense of humanity or something that you can use of therapy other than sticking a needle in your arm or drinking some shit. It's music. It's vibration. It's to know that that's available to you. But not only that, the day you understand you're a creator. In other words, you communicate. That's what you do. And that's how you exist. So, in other words, I exist with music. It's part of my life. So, in other words, it's not this separate thing that I talk about or I shine up and put up on a shelf and I take it down when I need to wear it as a red badge of courage. It's part of my DNA. And just because I got all these parents didn't guarantee I was going to become a musician, because my sister and brother didn't. Okay, so it wasn't that. It has to be something about it that appeals to you. And as far as recording was concerned, you know, the majority of productions, you know, even my ex-wife with Natalie, after producing Unforgettable and Tony Bennett and all these other people, no one has ever called me to come do anything. You're talking to the person who made the call and convince them, let me try to do that for you. That's the way I've existed. No one's calls me for anything. Only time they call me is if something's broke and can I fix it?
I love, dude, you bring your torch. I mean, I really think being proactive, not waiting around for the phone to ring. Ultimately, you have to be extremely. I have to ask you this question before it leaves my mind.
Go
You
ahead.
know, part of me, when I go see live music, especially my peers, I have sometimes on a really good night, I have what I'm sure you're familiar with, called descarga, which is the spiritual discharge from your brain from the rhythm.
Uh-huh.
And I want you to talk about um, going to the El Matador and seeing whether you saw Willie Bobo, Armando Peraza with Claire and Cal Jader. That Cal Jader put me on my path 12 years ago when I started this journey. I wound up connecting. I interviewed all these cats in the band. Obviously, your uncle was passed away at that point, but eventually got to his daughter, and she got me to Dave Brubeck. But the point is, I mean, Cal would have to fight for Mongo and Willie Bobo to get equal pay. Regardless, that was Descarga personified. I was wondering if you could talk about like a spiritual experience you have, considering you already had been playing hand drums quite a bit from your father.
Well, in other words, it's almost like the old saying, if you can dance to it, you can play it.
You're right.
Right now, it's like when when I used to dance with one of my ex-wives, she says, "Why are you always humming when we dance?"
I love it, dude.
Well, if you solo my drum tracks on any of the recordings I've done, if you solo them and turn them up, you'll hear me humming. I'm humming the song. I play the song, and that's why musicians would call me. That's why I played in groups, because it felt good. It felt good to them because it felt that I was playing the song. I wasn't playing time and just a fill. I was playing the melody. I was playing the song. I used to watch a drummer named Albino Jerry. He was from Cleveland. He played behind the OJs when there was 5 of them. And I was in the house band of the Bottoms Up Club in Columbus, Ohio. It was one of my road gigs that I decided no longer to keep touring with whoever I was touring with. And a house band of a club hired me there in Columbus, Ohio, after a performance I'd done, to be in the house band. The guy who hired me was J.C. Davis, the sax player on Please, Please, Please from James Brown.
Sure.
Okay, he had the best house band in Columbus was at the Bottoms Up Club. I wound up as the drummer. And the first person we backed up was Solomon Burke. And then Mabel John, little Willie John's sister, who was also one of the Raylettes. And then Etta James came through. In other words, every act that came through town, we backed it up. And that's when I saw the OJs. and they came in with their own rhythm section, and they had a drummer that he was not only was he in jazz, but he was in R&B. He would accent the dance moves without losing a beat. And that's also too what a lot of Count Basie and the earlier music people call jazz, basically white people. To black people, it wasn't jazz, it was dance music.
That's right.
Okay, so jazz was when there was a little bit more improvisation, and not only that, but the people we respected the most as musicians wasn't a guy who just came out and played any random note he felt like. It usually was somebody that knew his basic foundation was just like ours, where we'd studied everything from classical to big band. And when you're learning music as a kid in school, basically most of it's classical or it's marching band music.
That's right. Totally.
Okay, so in other words, fundamentals are fundamentals. It deviates when you've decided that's what you want to do, or it becomes part of your expression. That's when you start getting specific. But it's just like a record producer. If all I can produce, it's like when I did Unforgettable and it won all those damn Grammys, the only calls I would get was somebody who wanted to produce dead people. Can you grab this voice and put it with their son? And I'm like, you know what? I've done it already. Okay, so I have to do other things. I remember I was doing Brenda Russell's records, and I did something called Piano in the Dark, and then I did a bunch of other stuff. But I get with Brenda, and they say, well, every time we hear the songs you do with Brenda, they sound so stylized, and then when she gets with other producers, it sounds typical. That's one of the words that we use.
Formulaic. Yeah.
But the deal is I'm a drummer. She's a piano player. Plus, I play trombone. So in other words, I'm aware of melody as well as rhythm. Okay, so she's left-handed. Okay, which most piano players who are right-handed, they're stressing the chord in the right hand. The left hand sometimes becomes an incidental, where the bass is not always as defined as, say, a bass player's bass notes would be. So I said, in order to stylize Brenda's songs, I made the bass player play her left hand, because I put things in the track that could make her stand up. Because just like Roberta Flack, when Roberta Flack plays piano, she's giving herself everything she needs. So how are you going to get her to stand up in front of a microphone? The only way to do that and have them comfortable is you put the elements of their style that they need in the track from other instruments and other musicians. So I stylized Brenda's tracks based upon the way she plays and sings. Her cadence is based upon the way she plays. Okay, so in other words, the only way I know that is I have to listen. All right, so I listened to that, and that's how I put the records together. So every time Brenda and I would get together, people would like a record, and we, as they say in the business, we did business. As soon as she went somewhere else, and somebody esoteric comes along, and they think they know Brenda, it just wasn't the same. And what it is it doesn't, there's other special people just like me, but the point is there's only one of each of us. So sometimes you will lose a band member, and some parts of it may stay the same, but something slightly changes. Just like when Danny Serafini left Chicago. Okay, there's a way that he played that they were used to, and when they hit those accents together. And then it got slicker when he left, but it didn't necessarily get better. It just got different.
You're nailing it. I mean, did you go to the Dragonwick Club to see Bobby Hutcherson and Charles Lloyd?
What, in San Francisco?
No, this Dragonwick Club was. It's just this is really interesting because have you ever hung with Jim Keltner before, the drummer?
Jim Keltner on the Rufus album, when my left wrist was broken, he played on a song called "Dance with Me" for me.
Oh my God! So this is the greatest. I mean, if you know this already, that's fantastic. I just want to say one of the things that touched my heart so much about having a chance to interview you is that Keltner,
I love Jim Keltner, man.
Well, no, so this is pretty amazing, and this might be brand news to you, but if it is, I'm very proud because Keltner would like to kind of forget about the fact that he was a complete jazz snob in the 60s. He used to go and see Bobby Hutcherson and Charles Lloyd play, and they used to spend time and talk to him. And eventually, Keltner and Albert Stinson, they'd be on the bandstand trying to pretend to be Philly Joe and Paul Chambers, this, that. Dude, in 1969, and I mailed the only copy of the record I had to Jim on a label called Progressive, Claire Fischer album with Bobby West on bass, Gary Foster on horn, and Jim Keltner playing drums. It is out of control, burning post-bop jazz. It's
shit!
It's dude. I'm telling you, I'll send you a link to the record. It touched my heart. I was like, Claire his spirit is here, man. And Jim cannot stand listening to himself. They play like an 18-minute tune. It's before he really veered off and became the studio cat that we all know. It was just so incredible that he was in the studio with Claire, cooking the groove with Bobby West, trying his best to play jazz. It was beautiful, man. It speaks to, I don't even want to get into. Can we do set two, man? Like this week sometime? Because I don't even.
Hell yeah, man!
Yeah,
Jim, man, the thing about Jim to me is that I never knew how old he was. He's ageless.
Dude, I talk to him all the time, and he doesn't have it easy either, man. We all are bringing that torch, but he's ageless, man. And just the fact that he played while you were nursing a broken wrist on that is just. And then the Claire Fischer connection is always there. I'm going to send you a link to this album because you have to find a way to get a hold of it because it's one of the only albums I've ever heard Keltner attempting to play jazz. It's unreal.
Well, I'll call my cousin Brent. I'll call Claire's son.
Absolutely, dude.
I'll see if he has because Brent's got a lot of shit. In other words, all the old Rufus arrangements my uncle did, or even Robert Palmer and all that stuff, the original Onion Skins and some of the composition sheets are logged over at my uncle's house. Wow. And my cousin Brent lives in my uncle's house.
So I'll get with you. Let's try to knock out another set this week. We haven't even gotten to Chicago yet because we got to talk about we got to talk about my man. I'm not sure if you did you know Ross Salamone?
Fuck do I? Of course I know Ross.
He's a dear friend. So what I'm saying is like, I mean, dude, I've been. Yeah.
I remember when Ross went on his diet and he wore sweat clothes and he drove up and down hills to lose weight. Oh God.
Yeah, no, he just called himself a porky Italian guy, and
I love Ross.
There he was at the Pussycat watching Billy Hart with Jimmy Smith. So we got a lot more to get into.
I got stories. I got stories from Brunswick. That's when I first met Bruce Swedeen in Chicago.
Oh my God! No, and also, I mean, I'm like, I just have to feel. I mean, first of all, a guy who I talked to his wife. There's so much flooding through me, but a few years ago, the stone genius. I mean, Stevie Wonder probably is the ultimate, but if there was a second tier, the next cat was Richard Evans, man.
That's who. Excuse me. Jake, that's my production teacher.
I know.
I lived in Richard's fucking basement.
I called his wife. Yeah, he was not in great. She was very sick. I didn't have a chance to interview him, and he passed away. Just the man is just. I knew you guys were very close. It's so we'll spend a whole hour on that cat, man.
I love that man, and that's who introduced me to Ahmad Jamal. That's who introduced me to Bruce Swedeen. That's who introduced me to Jerry Butler. Okay, Richard. I think I was like his younger brother. He made me do shit. He took me places. He exposed me to everything. And then I hung out, and me and Donny Hathaway would break our necks trying to see who was going to get coffee for Charles Stepney.
Dude, I don't even want to go there right now. We got to save this immediately. I need all the information because, of course,
okay, Dick.
Yeah, we'll be in touch, Andre. So good to hear you, man.
Oh, dude, you just I just call me Potpourri, man.
Yeah, man, we're having a ball, dude. And listen, I'll if you want Keltner's number, I'll send it to you. You can give him a call, dude. You should call him.
Well, I'm getting ready to call Steve today too, so thank you for that.
All right, man. Yo, be cool, bro. Much love to you, man.
Oh, Jake, get down, man. Take care of yourself,
All right,
man.
baby. Be cool.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.